In the year 3026, a princess was born in the royal castle of the kingdom of Estonia. But don't be fooled by her appearance. This little Tekeke was actually Chloe, a 16-year-old high school student. A moment ago, she'd been in an accident while trying to save a kitten. When she woke up, she was a newborn baby. Right now, a maid was carrying the infant to an audience with the king. Seeing the emperor's trembling hands and cold attitude, Chloe knew this was a bad sign. Just then, the emperor opened his mouth, his eyes filled with disgust. Another girl. The princess was bewildered. What's wrong with being a girl? Are girls no good? Behind the king stood countless ministers, all of whom would decide this little princess's fate. Dr. Bowen spoke up. The royal family has had 3 princesses in a row. I fear this is an omen of misfortune. Even the royal advisor petitioned the king, saying that for the sake of the country's destiny, this princess could not be kept. With the royal family of Estonia producing princess after princess, the ministers all feared it would affect the nation's fortune. As for the little princess, her face was filled with confusion as she listened to the toxic ramblings of these adults. Finally, that emperor of a father made his decision. He wanted his newborn daughter drowned. The maid held the princess, and though she was reluctant, she had to carry out the order. The little princess still couldn't believe her rotten luck to be reincarnated as a princess only to be murdered by her own father. The princess looked at the basin of water before her and began to tremble with fear. She started thrashing and wailing in her baby voice, cursing the emperor for being a rotten scumbag who'd kill his own daughter. And this made hearing a newborn speak startled her so much that she let go, and the princess plopped right into the bucket. Panicked, the baby cried and thrashed even harder. The jerk of a king finally turned around in shock, not expecting his newborn daughter to already know how to talk. His ministers did a complete 180 as well, praising the tiny princess as a genius for being able to speak so soon. The princess was now sinking to the bottom of the bucket, her eyes still holding out hope that someone would save her. A hand reached down and pulled her from the brink of death. The jerk king held the little princess upside down, declaring that if she was truly a genius, they would keep her. He told the maid that he would return in 3 months to test the baby's IQ. Then he coldly tossed his daughter to the servant, saying that if she didn't score high enough, there would still be time to drown her. Then the princess, lying in the maid's arms, screamed in terror. This country was a nightmare. That scowling, insufferable man was still so prejudiced against women. Seeing his daughter cry, he just thought women were a nuisance who did nothing but weep. She wondered if this royal pain in the ass even had a mother, or if he thought he was born from a rock. Meanwhile, in a lavish corner of the palace, Queen Livia, a ripe 23 years old, looked at her newborn daughter with tears in her eyes. The princess knew that her mother was so exhausted from childbirth she couldn't even stand. But ever since she'd learned that her rotten father wanted to drown her, this mother had been crying non-stop for 8 hours. It was so much crying that the princess was getting annoyed she couldn't sleep. The queen came to her daughter's side and began her lament again. My poor daughter. The little princess turned her back to her mother, silently retorting, No, I'm not the pitiful one. I think you are the queen of a nation who went through the pain of childbirth but hasn't even seen her own husband. Now that's pitiful. The queen, her voice choked with tears, said, If only you were a boy. Princess was furious. Why was this country so sexist? Just then, her mother's trembling hands reached for her, saying, The daughters of the royal family have never had good endings. If they are born, they are not allowed to live. And if they live, they are not allowed to live in peace. The princess started to get a bad feeling, and she was right. Her mother wanted to do it herself rather than let the king drown her daughter in 3 months. The princess gasped for air, her throat squeezed by her own mother's hands. The queen was also in agony, begging her daughter not to blame her, saying she was doing this for her own good. The princess was purple with rage. Of course I blame you! She thought her dad being a lunatic was bad enough, but it turned out her mom was even crazier. She'd only been born for 8 hours, hadn't even had a nap, and now her mother was trying to strangle her. Just at the most critical moment, the king stormed in, demanding to know what his wife was doing. The princess was finally saved, painfully crawling in her cradle, gasping for air. Queen Livia tried to stammer out an explanation but couldn't form the words. The jerk king lost his patience and said he didn't care what she was doing and didn't want to know. He used some kind of magic to lift the princess into the air, declaring her his daughter. This tyrant said that other than him, no one was allowed to kill the princess. The princess was terrified. She thought her dad had good intentions, but it turned out he only saved her so he could kill her himself. His eyes were as red as blood as he growled at the queen. "Do you understand?" The queen stammered, "I understand." Then knelt, thanking His Majesty for visiting. She looked weak, slumping to the floor, shivering as she thanked him for coming despite his busy schedule. Seeing this, the princess was furious, silently cursing her father for being such a scoundrel, not even helping his wife up when she was so weak. The king, however, looked disgusted and angrily told the queen to stop being so sentimental. He then grabbed the princess by the leg, saying he came to settle a score with this little brat. The princess was confused. She was still a baby. What score was there to settle? Besides, she really hated the way this king was holding her. The petty father was now interrogating the princess for daring to call him dog crap in the main hall in front of hundreds of people the day before. The queen was horrified. She couldn't believe her ears. The princess, however, just giggled, delighted that it took her father a whole 18 hours to figure out she was insulting him. Hey, what an idiot. Seeing the little girl's bright smile only confirmed the king's suspicions. He realized she not only understood what adults were saying, but also knew how to curse her own father. The queen spoke up to defend her daughter, saying the princess was less than a day old. How could she possibly curse him? The king shot her a look that could kill. "Are you saying my judgment is wrong?" The queen immediately fell to her knees in fear, saying that wasn't her intention at all, but rather that if the king wanted to execute the child, he should just let her do it instead of torturing her. The king smirked. "Who said I wanted to kill the princess?" The queen looked up, a gash on her forehead from prostrating herself so fervently, and asked him with suspicion what he was doing here. The princess also looked displeased, wondering what his intentions were. That rotten jerk of a king actually smiled at his daughter and said he was here to give her a name. Hearing this, the little princess looked at her father in a new light, trying to act obedient to get a decent name. Seeing his daughter like this, the king had a fleeting thought that she was actually kind of cute. The queen, both happy and curious, asked what name His Majesty intended to give the princess. He smiled and said a single name, Atoria. He named her Princess Atoria. The queen, hearing the name, beamed and praised it. What a beautiful name. But her deadbeat dad replied, Atoria. It means ill-fated star in the old tongue. Hearing her father give her such a name, the princess absolutely could not accept it. She couldn't believe there was a father in the world who would name his own daughter, his biological daughter, something like that. The king's mind was still full of prejudice. He believed that because of this baby's birth, the Western Empire had declared war on his country, and 300 ministers were petitioning him to execute her. He gently placed his daughter on the bed, not forgetting to call her unlucky. The princess felt that she was born into a life of tragedy, weighed down by feudalistic traditions, and it was agonizing. She was furious, wanting to scream at her father to use his brain for a second. People wanted to go to war. They would have gone to war whether she was born or not. After he was done, he walked out, saying before he left that the two of them could rest assured, before he returned, no one would dare harm the queen and her daughters. He said if anyone did dare to harm them, he would chop them into 100 pieces when he got back. The queen was overjoyed, clasping her hands and thanking His Majesty for protecting the princess, feeling that he was acting a bit more like a man. A good man should protect his wife and children unconditionally, after all. The poor mother then hugged her child, tears flowing again. Even though she was a girl, His Majesty not only didn't despise the princess, but even protected her. The queen felt that Atoria was her good luck charm. Atoria pushed her mother away with her small hands, a look of utter disgust on her face at the old lady's over-the-top reaction. So, what if that jerk dad was a little handsome? There was no need to be that moved. Atoria wiped her mother's tears. Even though she was a girl, she was still his biological daughter. He had no right to despise her. She wanted to tell her mother that whether she was a boy or a girl, as a father, the king had a duty to protect her. In reality, though, the king still found women troublesome, thinking they were useless for anything besides crying. Hearing this, Atoria could only glare at him with rage. This guy truly looked down on women from the bottom of his heart. 3 months later, the day of Atoria's IQ test arrived. A super full tub of water was prepared next to her, ready to drown her at a moment's notice. The maid held the baby and comforted her. "Princess, don't be afraid. I will definitely protect you." Atoria was terrified. She glanced around. According to the agreement, today was the IQ test. If she was deemed not smart enough, she'd be drowned. But everyone had been waiting for a long time, and that damn dog of a king still hadn't shown up. The crowd below began to whisper amongst themselves. The king had been at war with the Western Empire for 3 months and still hadn't returned, and they heard he had been injured. All of this they blamed on the unlucky princess. One agitated fool used it as an excuse to hurl a rock at the princess and her maid. His action was the spark that ignited the crowd. They all started screaming for the little princess's death. Furthermore, in this sick and backward country, there was a tradition. When faced with an angry mob, a princess could either voluntarily, or by force, atone with her life. Atoria started to cry in fear. Although she was worried about that jerk king, his injury only proved he was an amateur. What did that have to do with a newborn baby like her? Just then, one crazed man decided to take matters into his own hands. His face was purple with rage. He shouted that if Atoria died, the kingdom of Estonia's luck would change. They would defeat the Western Empire, and the king could return. The maid hugged Atoria and backed away, trying to protect her. "No, you can't. Other than the king, no one is allowed to harm the princess." The aggressive man, seeing the maid desperately clinging to the princess, started to get physical. He screamed at the maid to let go, calling Atoria an unlucky star who had to be killed, a low-class creature. Despite his yelling, the maid remained loyal, holding Atoria tight. And so, a tug-of-war began. Being pulled like a string cheese stick, Atoria felt miserable. She felt it would be more pleasant to just have her throat slit. But just at this critical moment, her protagonist halo shone through, and someone came to her rescue. The savage brute was suddenly attacked by someone, his face contorting in pain as blood trickled from his mouth. Who would have thought the attack came from a 4-year-old kid? It was Prince Damien of Estonia, an intermediate-level mage. After protecting Atoria, he spoke with an air of authority. "Anyone who touches her, this prince will kill them." The brood who had just been hit immediately bowed his head in fear, greeting the grand prince. Damon held out his hand, and a mystical light shot towards Atoria, lifting her into the air and back into her mother's arms. The queen's face was filled with worry. Atoria looked at Damon, not expecting the little brat to be her older brother. His aura was just like that jerk king's, but to Atoria, the kid was actually pretty cute. The queen weakly pleaded with the frenzied crowd, saying she was also sad that the king was injured, but begged them not to harm her daughter. She had barely gotten a sentence out before the wolves in the crowd shouted at her to shut up, calling her useless and blaming her for continuously giving birth to daughters, thus affecting the country's luck. Among the vile rebels, 3 men stood out. They said if the queen wanted to apologize, she should die to atone along with Princess Atoria. Damien stood tall, a man protecting his family in his father's absence. He declared that with him here, he'd like to see anyone try to harm his sister and mother. The 3 men knelt, using their cunning words to try and deceive Damien. They told him he was too young to understand that women who bring ruin to a country come in all ages. On the surface, they appeared respectful to the Grand Prince, but the 3 rebels were secretly gathering their magic. Suddenly, they all attacked him at once. Their true identities were spies from the Western Empire. With the master away, they planned to kill the Grand Prince and claim the huge reward from their home country. And their sneak attack succeeded. Even though Damien was a prodigy, he was still just a 4-year-old and couldn't withstand such a powerful spell. Seeing this, the queen was frantic. She immediately ran forward, using her own body to shield her young son from the magic. Damon was so heartbroken for his mother that he burst into tears. He could only scream, telling his mother to get out of the way, that she didn't know magic, and would surely die. The moment the queen fell, protecting her son, a familiar voice rang out, angrily calling the three rebels a pathetic mob. A green dragon appeared, formed from the pure magic of a king. The king of Estonia had finally returned, which meant those traitorous spies were about to pay the price. The king lifted his wife, his voice deceptively sweet and affectionate. "You really are a fool. So weak, yet you still rush into danger." Hearing his father's intense words, Damon thought, this must be the legendary love bites he'd heard about. Atoria, on the other hand, was indignant, silently cursing the jerk king. His wife had been so brave, and he couldn't even offer a single compliment, showing that disgusting attitude instead. The queen, however, was overcome with emotion to see the king alive. She leaned against his chest and smiled happily, much to the horror of Atoria, who was about to be squashed into a sandwich. The lead traitor was still running his mouth, insisting that the king's misfortune was surely the fault of those two women, and begged him to execute them to maintain the country's peace. Seeing these pathetic men blame women for their own incompetence on the battlefield, Atoria was furious. She and her mother would never take the fall for this. The king just let out a dry laugh. He held his wife and daughter close. "My woman. My daughter. Does a pathetic mob like you have the right to comment on them?" His magic flared, and the mob began to panic, trembling as they asked the king what he was doing. As the magic tightened around their throats, the pathetic fools probably had their answer. The men screamed like pigs being slaughtered, still claiming, even as they were about to die, that they were doing it for the good of Estonia. The clever little princess saw through their lies in a second. Killing the princess and queen is for the good of Estonia. They're probably spies from another country. King just gave a cold smile. With a clench of his iron fist, the mob was squeezed tighter until a slimy green liquid oozed out, staining the floor. Everyone was shocked to realize it was dark energy, a magic only possessed by those who walked an evil path. While everyone was still confused, the king confirmed their suspicions. On his expedition against the Western Empire, his army's plans were known to the enemy before they even mobilized. It was because of this pathetic mob that Astana suffered a major defeat. With heavy losses and the sacrifice of 300,000 brave soldiers in front of everyone present, the king walked towards his son and suddenly knelt. "Damien, your father has failed you." As soon as he finished speaking, a magical portal of light appeared. Two figures in full armor stepped out. They said it was time, and that Prince Damien was to come with them. The king immediately encouraged his son to go with them, telling him to learn their techniques well and not to disappoint him. Damien now understood. This was why his father had apologized. He was hurt but understood and could only obey his father even though he didn't want to. His small feet walked towards the portal, stepping into the great magical light. Before he left, he said a few brief words of farewell to his father, mother, and Atoria. Finally, Damon disappeared. Seeing her father's smirk afterward, Atoria felt incredibly indignant, silently cursing him as a scoundrel. The country had suffered a major defeat. Over 300,000 men had died, and he had just sold his own son. Yet he wasn't sad at all, and even looked happy. She began to think seriously, suspecting that maybe he had lost the battle on purpose. But for what reason? The king stood before the throne and reassured everyone. He said the prince's departure would buy them 10 years of peace. Hearing the number 10, the queen couldn't help but feel heartbroken for her poor son. Atoria just spat contemptuously. Based on his detestable face, she was sure he lost on purpose. There had to be some secret. Just then, that rotten hand reached for her. The king lifted his daughter by the scruff of her neck. "It's time for the intelligence test." The queen, sitting nearby, felt incredibly anxious. The feelings of a mother who had just parted with her son and now had to witness a test that would determine her daughter's fate were truly agonizing. The court officials below began to whisper. It was the first time in years they had seen someone so young take an intelligence test. They didn't even know if Princess Atoria could understand the questions. The jerk king coldly told his daughter that the kingdom of Estonia had enough princesses. If she wasn't a genius, she didn't need to live. Atoria was enraged, repeatedly cursing her wolf of a father and her slurred baby talk, and kicking him in the face. After a struggle, She grew tired and flopped down. She thought this king was truly insane. If every parent demanded their child be a genius and killed them otherwise, wouldn't the human race go extinct? The king was furious, too, and tossed her onto a nearby cushion. I see you've started cursing your father again. It seems this little brat is confident. He then smiled and ordered the test to begin. Dr. Bowen would be administering the test. This intelligence test has 3 questions in total. We will do them one by one. If the princess fails to answer any question correctly, she will be drowned immediately. If the princess answers all 3 questions and is proven to be a genius of Astana, the king will treat her generously. He then smiled at Atoria, telling her that when the question was asked, she could just clap her hands to indicate the answer. He even patted her head, saying that if she could speak, it would be even better to just say the answer directly. The doctor's hand glowed with magic. This was the first question. White doves immediately flew out. The doctor said, "Princess, look! There are 7 birds in total." Suddenly, 4 of them die. As he spoke, 4 small bird carcasses fell in front of the princess. A vivid illustration. The question is, how many birds are left in the sky? The old royal advisor stroked his beard in disapproval. This was a 7th grade math problem. Even if the princess wasn't a prodigy, how could she answer something so difficult? Atoria was confused. Isn't this just 7 minus 4? What's so hard about that? She let out a little cry and held up 3 fingers. She thought, even if I can't speak clearly, they can see my hand gesture, right? Besides, is such a simple question really for 7th graders? Is the math level of people in this world really that bad? The queen's face bloomed like a flower, congratulating Atoria for answering correctly. Next up was question number 2. Dr. Bowen revealed it was a bit harder and told Atoria she could take her time to calculate it and write down the answer when she was ready. Up on the throne, the jerk king had warned Bowen to make the questions harder. If he gave another simple one, Bowen would be the one to die. Bowen had to sigh and decided to give a problem that no more than 10 people in the entire country could solve. If the princess could do it, she would be incredible. But deep down, the doctor felt His Majesty was just making things difficult for his own daughter. A child this young, even a genius, couldn't possibly solve this question. That rotten king still demanded the doctor give a very difficult question, preferably one no one had ever solved before. The royal advisor had to speak up for the princess, asking the king if he really intended to drown the princess right in front of the queen. He just smiled and said he knew what he was doing, then urged the doctor to ask the question. After a few seconds of scribbling, the high schooler and Princess Abadi proudly showed off her answer. A question like this, Atoria thought, was only 3rd grade level. How could only 10 people in the country solve it? Was it possible that only magic was advanced here and everything else was behind? Dr. Bowen held up the answer, his eyes nearly popping out of their sockets in astonishment. The question was, on a math test, the class average was 91.2. There were 21 girls with an average score of 92, and the boys' average was 90.5. How many boys were in the class? Atoria's answer was 24, completely correct. The royal advisor couldn't contain his excitement and hugged Atoria. He congratulated the king and queen, affirming that Princess Atoria was an outstanding genius, solving such a difficult math problem at only 3 months old. What was more surprising was that the princess could not only speak and write, but also read and understand. The royal advisor excitedly declared Atoria a once-in-millennium genius. He happily lifted her and spun her around. The king also nodded in agreement that the problem wasn't easy, and Atoria solving it was not bad, but he was still not satisfied. Contemptuously asking Dr. Bowen, "Is that all you've got?" He used magic to take a story from the royal advisor's hands. This final question, the jerk of a king wanted to ask himself. He reached out and used his magic to pull something from Dr. Bowen's pocket. A capsule-shaped object flew out, causing the doctor to watch it with a pained expression. The king said he remembered there were quite a few treasures in this spatial pouch of his. He opened the capsule, and countless objects flew out, all from the Middle Ages. The princess watched with wide eyes, completely thrilled. This magic was so cool. The king chose something that looked like a wooden box from among the objects, covered in all sorts of charms. He said it was a piece of music from 1,000 years ago, but had been severely damaged. He told Ettoria that if she could restore it, he would spare her life. Dr. Bowen was shocked. He bluntly told the king this was going too far. This was an artifact from a great being from before the blue planet was destroyed. Even if the princess was a prodigy, she couldn't possibly restore such an ancient piece of music. Ettoria was just as shocked. The blue planet she just heard? Could it be Earth? Ettoria tried to console herself. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Just then, the music began to play. She had to admit the things in this magical world were truly amazing. This jerk king hadn't done anything, just flicked his finger, and she could hear the music. However, Ettoria was truly at a loss. She had always been terrible at music, failing her exams. She was completely tone-deaf. As she was despairing, a familiar tune reached her ears. Wasn't this Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star? The damn king then tossed Ettoria away and ordered Bowen to give her a pen. Bowen, seeing the princess about to fall, was terrified and reached out to catch her, holding her in his arms. Bowen was full of sympathy. How is this possible? This is a piece of music from 1,000 years ago. He wondered, does His Majesty really not want Princess Ettoria? How could this little girl possibly restore this musical score? Ettoria picked up the pen, a chill running down her spine. Thank goodness it was this song, or she really would have died here. She then began to write at lightning speed. Although she didn't understand what they were talking about with a 1,000-year-old musical score, this was definitely Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. No doubt about it. Ignoring everything else, Ettoria was sure she could do it. And that cruel king was still watching his daughter with the same cold eyes who knew what he was thinking. After writing down a series of numbers, Ettoria held up the paper with a proud look on her face. The royal advisor took the paper, hesitated, then burst out laughing. He said he told them so. How could the princess restore such a difficult piece of music? She had just written down some weird numbers. However, grading a 3-month-old's paper, he thought it was pretty impressive for her to write so many numbers at her age. Dr. Bowen, however, hearing about the numbers, had his eyes light up. He snatched the test from the royal advisor's hands. Bowen looked at the paper, his face immediately showing astonishment. The princess had actually managed to restore it. He then smiled happily, once again, affirming before the king that Ettoria was a genius. The royal advisor immediately objected, seeing only a random string of numbers. Bowen looked at him with disdain. He explained that numbers were one way to write music, and even mocked the royal advisor for being uncultured. He waved his hand using magic to play the music from Ettoria's numbers, proving to the royal advisor what art was. The childhood melody rang out. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. The entire palace listened in awe, marveling at how beautiful the complete song was. The princess was now recognized as a prodigy. Ettoria couldn't believe her own mediocre skills were being hailed as genius level. She thought these people were just too ignorant. The jerk king suddenly grabbed her by the neck, lifting her up before the worried eyes of the queen. He flew with Ettoria high into the air. The court officials were all stunned, not understanding where he was taking her. Ettoria was starting to feel dizzy. The jerk king quickly noticed her discomfort. He smirked and asked Ettoria if she liked this feeling, then said he would speed up so she could feel it more clearly. He shot off like an arrow into the vast space beyond. Ettoria felt like she was about to meet her maker. She could only silently curse the inhuman jerk king. She was just a baby. Was he trying to kill her by flying this fast? Finally, he chose an empty, bright, and airy place to stop. The king threw out a small, glowing orb, and a barrier was immediately formed. He then roughly threw Ettoria down onto the magic circle. The king seemed quite satisfied. Now, no one could bother them. Despite Ettoria's extreme panic, he continued to look at her with scrutinizing eyes. His hands glowed with intense magic, and his attitude suddenly became so furious he could have killed her at any moment. He interrogated Ettoria. "Who are you? Where did you come from? How old are you? Male or female?" Atoria was terrified, her whole body trembling. She didn't understand what he was saying. She only knew that with his tense attitude, she could be killed at any moment. He summoned a dagger filled with magical energy and began to expose her. His footsteps drew closer. Speaking since birth, solving a math problem that less than 10 people in the country could solve without being taught, and even restoring a 10,000-year-old piece of music. So he had intentionally let Bone ask difficult questions, and she had still managed to solve them. The baby's face, after being exposed, was a picture of shock. The tyrannical king continued to look at her with eyes sharper than the dagger he was pointing at her, forcing the little girl to tell the truth. Atoria was on the verge of tears. She knew she had been too careless. Being able to talk, write, and compose music, these were not the abilities of a newborn, not even a genius. But she couldn't admit she came here through transmigration. Absolutely not. She knew that once he was certain there was someone else in his daughter's body, he would kill her without hesitation. The queen, seeing this, had tears welling in her eyes. She screamed, asking the king what he was doing. All she got in return was the king's increased anger towards Atoria. His eyes were bulging as he forced the little girl to speak or die. Seeing the cold blade getting closer and closer, Atoria was terrified. In this life or death situation, it was still the queen who rushed forward to plead for her. She was immediately jolted back by the barrier. Both the royal advisor and Dr. Bowen looked at the queen with pity. That damn king, seeing his wife like that, ran to support her. He angrily scolded her. "You foolish woman. Are you trying to die?" But perhaps deep down, he really did care for the queen. Not knowing how to please him, she could only stare at her husband with wide eyes. Atoria's brain went into overdrive. The little girl decided that regardless of whether the king really wanted to kill her or not, at least the queen truly loved her. If she stuck with her, she could definitely stay alive. Atoria took a deep breath and let out a loud wail. Hearing her little daughter's cries, the queen shouted words of encouragement. "Atoria, don't be afraid. I'm coming to save you." The king had to retract the barrier. He didn't want the queen to get hurt. Atoria tearfully crawled towards her mother. She was truly scared. The queen was her only anchor. The queen hugged her little daughter, gently comforting her. As for the monarch, he knew Atoria was quick to find someone to rely on. However, he couldn't let it go that easily. He remembered on the battlefield with the Western Empire, he and his soldiers had discovered strange creatures. From what he understood, these creatures had somehow fallen into his country, and they were organized and disciplined. Seeing Atoria's strange abilities, he worried she might be one of those strange creatures that had fallen into his country. He glanced at the queen and told her to take care of the child. Atoria hugged her mother and breathed a sigh of relief, thinking she had finally managed to save her own life. The cruel king just smirked and said he would come to the queen's chambers tonight, telling her to be prepared. It was unclear what his intentions were, but Atoria was scared out of her wits. Is he coming to kill me tonight? The queen must have had the same worry, her face clouding over, but she could only obey. After returning, Atoria obediently acted like a newborn baby, lying in her cradle with a pacifier in her mouth, while the kind maid chatted with her. The maid told the princess to be on her best behavior tonight because the king was going to visit the queen. She warned Atoria not to disturb them while they were making a baby. Hearing those words, Atoria's jaw dropped. The maid saw her expression and affectionately patted the little princess's head, then whispered to Atoria that if things went well tonight, she might have a little brother or sister. Atoria sat up, her eyes wide. She looked over to the large bed where the queen was sitting, grooming herself. If Atoria remembered correctly, this mother of hers had married that jerk king at 18. And now at 23, she had already given birth to 2 princes and 3 princesses for the royal family. Atoria's face showed a flicker of worry. Having so many kids, is that really okay? Just then, the chamber door was kicked open by a small, rude foot. A little brat's voice called out, "3-month-old Atoria, get out here and face me." The maid was startled and asked why the second prince was here. But the ill-mannered brat charged towards Atoria. He was already gathering magic in his hands. He wanted revenge for his older brother. This little kid blamed Atoria for his big brother being sent away. Atoria was confused. The big brother he's talking about. Wait. Do I know him? But the vicious little kid had already decided to attack. Atoria panicked and could only cry out in fear. Hearing the commotion, the queen rushed out to check on her daughter. The cradle had been knocked to the floor. A small, trembling hand reached out. Atoria coughed, crawling out. A stream of red blood trickled down her forehead. Atoria felt lucky she had dodged in time. She never thought a 3- or 4-year-old could be so destructive. If she had really been hit, she'd be dead or crippled. The queen picked up her daughter, holding her close in sorrow, her tears streaming down. The little girl began to wail. That had scared her to death. The second prince was shocked to see blood. He probably hadn't expected the consequences to be so severe. A guilty look was clear on his face. His teacher had told him that at his level of magic, he basically couldn't hurt anyone. The second prince tremblingly explained to his mother that he didn't mean it, and even asked if Atoria was okay. The little girl just shrieked, wanting to use her actions to make the little bully stay away from her. The second prince froze, not expecting Atoria to be so scared of him. The door opened and another person entered, a cold voice asking what had happened. Atoria looked in that direction with a wronged expression. Her cruel father just stood there with his arms crossed, his voice cold. "Are you hurt?" Hearing him ask that, Atoria hesitantly touched her forehead. Seeing her hand covered in blood, she panicked, not realizing she was actually injured. The king, seeing that she seemed to understand his words again, looked at Atoria and ordered her to explain what happened. Atoria saw the intense stare and mysterious smile of that jerk king and was convinced he still wanted to kill her. "I have to think of something." Prince No thought his father was asking him and stepped forward to tearfully explain. The queen, not wanting Noel to be punished, stepped forward to take all the blame. But he growled at them to shut up. He suddenly grabbed Atoria by the leg. Atoria was left dangling upside down in the air, stunned as blood from her forehead dripped onto the floor. The cruel king told Atoria she knew how to talk, and repeatedly forced her to say what happened. Atoria knew he was still testing her, so she started crying loudly. It was better to play dumb, to pretend the blow to her head had damaged her brain, and she was no longer a prodigy. Seeing the baby cry so fiercely, the king felt a bit hesitant. He then reluctantly held her, sighing and letting it go. She was crying like this. He couldn't get anything out of her anyway. He'd deal with it later. Atoria was secretly pleased. From now on, she would be a weak, ordinary little girl. That way, he couldn't do anything to her. The tyrant then asked her, "Does it hurt a lot?" He then poked the wound on Atoria's forehead. She clutched her wound and cried, feeling like this madman really wanted to hurt her to death. After confirming she was really in pain, he finally believed her. He looked at Atoria and smiled. "If my Atoria is so badly hurt, then your father will sleep with you tonight to take care of you." Atoria was horrified and pushed him away. She didn't want to sleep with this guy at all. She was afraid that sleeping with someone so cruel, she would be killed. The second prince, hearing that his father wanted to sleep with Atoria, felt a pang of jealousy. The little boy was sad that he had never gotten to sleep next to his father. Seeing Atoria pushing their father away, Noel became furious. "What's with your attitude, Atoria? Father wants to sleep with you and you don't want to." "He's never slept with me. Not even once." After saying that, Noel looked puzzled and asked his father, "Could it be that Atoria at her age can understand what we're saying?" Atoria immediately froze, her face blank. Now she remembered she wasn't a prodigy anymore, just a normal baby. She shouldn't be able to understand what the second prince was saying. She forced a strange smile, convinced that this was how a normal child would react upon seeing their father. Atoria held out her small hands, smiling and asking for a hug. This act shot straight to N's heart. In that moment, he found his annoying little sister quite adorable. The king just smiled and told Noel maybe next time. The king coldly told the queen he didn't need her services tonight. He told her to leave if she had nothing else to do. He and Atoria were going to sleep. The queen, who had gone to so much trouble to prepare, could only bow her head and obey. The maid was heartbroken, thinking the king had come for the queen, only to see the queen fall out of favor. The entire royal palace was shrouded in the quiet darkness of the night. In the king's chambers, the little treasure Atoria was lying next to the jerk king. She was so sleepy, her eyes were drooping, but she encouraged herself not to sleep. She had to persevere. If she fell asleep, That jerk king might kill her. Atoria told herself that even if she had to die, she would die awake. Atoria tried a little too hard, to the point of thrashing around in the night. The king, who was lying there, suddenly felt the movement and opened his eyes. He saw that this little girl was still awake at this hour and knew something was not right. He secretly began to gather magic, intending to kill Atoria. Better to kill an innocent than to let a strange creature that could destroy his kingdom live. His murderous hands drew closer to the little girl. Unexpectedly, after all her struggling, Atoria couldn't resist any longer and fell sound asleep. Seeing this, the king stopped. He sighed, feeling that this little girl slept like a log. He began to doubt his own judgment. Maybe she was just an ordinary child. He got out of bed, thinking that if Atoria were an enemy, she wouldn't be able to sleep so soundly. The jerk king stepped outside, thinking perhaps he had been overthinking things. The room now held only Atoria, sleeping like a dead pig. The king's feet carried him to another room. He quietly called out to the queen. The queen was sleeping in the next room with Noel sleeping soundly beside her, even muttering in his sleep about his father being heartless for not sleeping with him. Hearing someone call her name, the queen's beautiful eyes fluttered open. She sat up, dazed, and surprised to see the king visiting her so late at night. The king answered her with a soft H from his throat. He reached out his warm hand to caress her cheek. The queen was very surprised and asked him why he was here. Wasn't he sleeping with Atoria? He didn't answer her question, just looked deep into her eyes and said seductively, "Queen, let's have another prince." Hearing these words, the good mother Livia immediately covered the king's mouth, firmly refusing, "We can't!" No one is still here. The king looked annoyed and glanced at the little boy sleeping soundly next to them. He glared at the queen. "Are you refusing me?" The queen immediately trembled and said that wasn't her intention at all. The domineering king was just waiting for that. He used his authority to make it impossible for the queen to refuse. Holding her by the waist, the king reassured her, saying no one could sleep through a thunderstorm. Just as he said that, a child's cry rang out, making them both jump. The queen immediately recognized it as a story's cry and was very worried. The king next to her was so angry his face turned black. Atoria's noise had also woken up little Noel. Seeing his parents hugging, Noel sleepily asked if they were dancing. Let's rewind to Atoria, 10 minutes earlier. While the little girl was sound asleep, a tree branch suddenly pierced through the palace floor, accompanied by a strange, eerie voice. It said it had been in Aya for 3 months, and only now had the chance to get close to Princess Atoria. The little girl, startled by the loud noise, woke up. The monster, seeing it had been discovered, remained calm. It knew Atoria was special. Not from its planet, but also not the real Princess Atoria. Atoria trembled in fear at the sight of the strange creature. The little girl didn't know what it was. An alien. The creature found that name quite interesting, but if Atoria called them aliens, then the humans on this planet were no different. The creature explained that 1,000 years ago, humans fled the blue planet and came here to seize this planet. Atoria, hearing this, sternly refused to listen, feeling the story was going too far, and she didn't want to hear about things that didn't concern her. But still, Atoria had no idea what was happening. Why was she suddenly encountering aliens? Good grief. The strange creature continued its monologue. It laughed and said it was very interested in Atoria's body. It turned out this creature had tried to possess human bodies before, but the native humans were too strong and they couldn't take over their bodies. The strange creature said no one was as perfect as Atoria, who could possess a human body. The only problem was that she was too stupid, acting too differently from a normal baby. Otherwise, no one would have found out that the real Princess Atoria had disappeared. Being called stupid, Doria felt very resentful. After its presentation, the strange creature began to act. Its body transformed, sending out thorny tendrils like tree branches towards Atoria, wanting to seize her body. The thorny tendrils forced Atoria to retreat in fear. Her whole body was quickly entangled. Atoria felt the vines piercing her body, which was extremely painful. The strange creature offered words of comfort. The process will be a bit painful, but don't worry. You'll be dead soon. Just as it was about to succeed, a voice called out, "Atoria!" accompanied by hurried footsteps. The monster knew someone was coming. It hadn't expected Atoria to have already called for help. In the end, it's humans who are cruel and despicable. The thorny vines retracted, leaving countless wounds on Atoria's body. Although it was reluctant to have its plan ruined just as it was about to succeed, the strange creature couldn't let too many people discover it. So, it quickly retreated. Its body disintegrated into a pile of green slime, only its eyes still glaring at Atoria with hatred, vowing to remember this grudge. Finally, it plunged back into the ground and disappeared. A second later, the queen rushed in with a panicked look on her face, calling for Atoria. Seeing her mother, she trembled all over. At that moment, a series of beep-beep sounds rang out. The king frowned and quickly warned everyone to be careful, simultaneously casting a defensive spell over the queen. They then discovered a bomb right in front of them, with only a second left before it exploded. Looking at the rapidly shortening fuse, Atoria felt she was done for. Indeed, boom! A huge explosion occurred. The queen's heart ached, her face streaked with tears. Noel couldn't believe his eyes and called out for his sister. Only the king remained calm, telling everyone not to worry because he had put up a barrier. The little brat would be fine. When the smoke cleared, the image of a heavily injured Atoria appeared, coughing in a shattered, dilapidated barrier. She cursed silently in her heart. Damn it. It seems that jerk king still suspects me. She clearly saw that the king had used a perfect, undamaged barrier for them. While she got this piece of junk, Atoria felt that if she didn't have such strong plot armor, she would have been blown to bits. Overwhelmed with indignation, she screamed in anger. But then she saw the king's sharp gaze. Atoria felt he was testing her again. She wondered how she should react now. Atoria felt extremely tense, thinking that a child who had been saved by their parents in a dangerous situation would probably be smiling happily. Atoria then put on a naive, innocent, and completely guiltless smile. Seeing his sister's innocent smile, Nell was startled. He shouted, asking his mother if Atoria had been blown silly by the explosion. How could she still be grinning after such a big scare? He grabbed Atoria's leg just like his father always did. Noel said he heard Atoria had passed the hardest IQ test in history, which should mean this little brat was very smart. But he never expected her to be so foolish. Being held upside down like that, Atoria was furious. She thrashed about, thinking this brother of hers was no different from that jerk king. Seeing his sister's fierce attitude, Noel was a bit startled. But the next second, his simple mind thought his sister was cute, even when she was fierce. The boy continued to tease his sister, while unconsciously backing up, not expecting to step on a strange green capsule on the floor. After a hiss sound, the capsule unexpectedly opened a space-time portal. Noel slipped and fell backward. Both Noel and Atoria were being sucked into the portal. The queen, seeing this, screamed, "My children! Come back!" because it was extremely dangerous inside. Only the king remained calm and puzzled. He didn't understand why a space-time portal was here. Then he panicked and told Noel to grab his hand. Noel, though terrified, held his sister protectively. He shouted, "Father, what is this? Why is it sucking us in?" The little boy was terrified. The king comforted his son not to be afraid, then jumped in after them to save the two children. The space-time portal then closed, leaving the queen alone in the room, kneeling on the ground with a dazed look and the fear of losing her children. Meanwhile, in the royal garden, the little green creature, having fled in a hurry, now realized it had lost its space-time capsule. It cursed furiously, blaming the despicable humans and Atoria, certain she had stolen its space-time capsule. Without the space-time capsule, the strange creature's body began to disintegrate into a pile of slime beyond its control. Without that portal, it couldn't return to its home planet to replenish its energy. Just like that, the strange creature turned into a strange, plump green sprout in the royal garden. Although it had become a sprout, the creature could still hear and see everything around it. At that moment, it sensed a group of people approaching. It was the third princess, 2-year-old Princess Dahlia, leading her younger sister, the 1-year-old fourth princess, Princess Luna, to visit their mother after hearing a loud explosion. Princess Luna's eyes spotted the fat green sprout on the path. The mischievous little girl ordered her 2 maids to step on it, but the kind-hearted Dahlia stopped her sister, saying they shouldn't do that because it was also a living being. Luna looked up with her big round eyes and asked her sister,
If we can't step on it, can we eat it?
Dahlia felt her sister was a lost cause, and sternly told her no. She then reached down and pulled the fat sprout up by its roots. Dahlia smiled and told the strange creature, now in the form of an ugly little plant, that she would take care of it. Back to the three royals and the space-time capsule. Noelle and Atoria seemed to have fallen into an infinite space. Atoria now felt that this bratty boy who seemed so fierce was actually very warm. She was surprised that even though he was scared to death, he was still holding her so tightly. Atoria thought she should probably be gentler with him in the future. As for Noelle, he couldn't hold back his fear and started crying. The little boy sobbed that he was only 3 years old and didn't want to die. With the confidence of a high school girl who had just been reincarnated, Atoria smirked. In the end, Null was just a 3-year-old kid. Based on her years of reading novels, Atoria concluded that when the main character falls off a cliff, into the sea, or into a time-space vortex, they definitely won't die, but will come out much better. Maybe even with superpowers. Thinking about the exciting things that were about to happen according to this trope, Atoria smiled. She felt that, in consideration of Null protecting her, she would let the little brat bask in a bit of her main character, Halo. But it seemed things didn't go as smoothly as Atoria thought. A beep sound rang out with an announcement. Warning! Intruder detected. Activating defense system. Below them were countless sharp swords pointing upwards, just waiting for the two children to fall and be skewered. Noelle was terrified and held Atoria tightly. The two children continued to fall, and just as the sword tips were about to pierce Noelle's skin, the king appeared. He called out, "No!" and used his magic to create a barrier to protect the two children. Seeing his father, Noelle was moved to tears. He no longer had the presence of mind to hold his little sister. Noelle let go and ran towards his father. Atoria, without her brother holding her, fell directly down. Below were thousands of waiting blades. Atoria was indignant and furious that Brat was too much. A blade slashed across her shoulder and red blood flowed out. A second later, a beep sound was heard along with an announcement to deactivate the defense system. The blades disappeared, leaving Atoria stunned. She thought, could this be because of my main character, Halo? Just then, her heartless father grabbed her by the scruff of her neck. He looked at Atoria suspiciously, feeling that the reason the system shut down might be because of her. The space-time portal had brought them to another planet. Atoria looked around and felt this place was beautiful. But she was also stunned to wonder why there were so many space-time portals here. The moment Noelle landed, he grabbed his sister's head roughly and worriedly asked if she was okay. Doria couldn't believe this scoundrel still had the nerve to ask her that. The little girl was furious and slapped Noelle hard across the face. After being slapped, Noelle finally breathed a sigh of relief. He felt that as long as Atoria was okay, everything was fine. Now, Noelle noticed the difference in the surrounding scenery. He asked his father, "Where are we?" The king said he didn't know for sure, but if he guessed correctly, this was probably another planet. However, this planet is very strange. On our red star, space-time portals are extremely rare. The entire kingdom of Estonia only has 3, but here, there are space-time portals everywhere, and in front of each portal, there's a trap. It's really strange. Hearing about another planet, N was startled. The 3-year-old then asked innocently, "What kind of planet is a planet?" Which made Atoria faint. Atoria felt this guy was a real idiot. A planet isn't a type of vegetable you can eat. The king was focused on the tree in front of him, and casually replied to his son that he could have a teacher explain what a planet was when they got back. Right now, he had to assess the situation. The king activated his magic, raising his hand to his eyes. When he opened them again, he could clearly see strange threads extending from the tree. He wondered if these threads were life energy. Could it be that the creatures on this planet survived thanks to this tree? The king cautiously approached the tree. He could feel a powerful energy emanating from it. No wonder it could sustain an entire planet. He just didn't know if this energy could be brought back for humans to use. Just then, a familiar beep sound cut off his thoughts. Noelle dazedly asked Atoria if she heard anything. Atoria replied in her mind that she heard it very clearly. The little girl was even more surprised to see another space-time portal appear above her head. Before she could understand what was happening, Atoria was once again sucked into it. Noelle panicked and called out, "Sister!" The king behind him grabbed his son by the scruff of his neck and told him not to be afraid. She was just sucked into another space-time portal. Then he carried his son and jumped into the portal. Noelle was still worried and asked his father if Atoria would be okay. The king assured him that with him there, Atoria would be fine. The place Atoria landed was a cozy room with a wooden bed, and on the wall hung a picture of a green creature with a leaf. She was immediately drawn to the picture, feeling that this green thing was very familiar. Atoria was horrified to realize it was the same green thing that wanted to take over her body before. Could this be its home? She wondered why she was in its house. What planet was this? Atoria thought deeply. If that green thing was a living creature, then this planet should have creatures of the same kind. But why hadn't she seen anyone besides that big tree? Also being suddenly brought here, Atoria wondered if it was the legendary main character privilege. Atoria sighed, her head aching from not being able to figure it out. Was there some mission on this planet that she needed to complete? Behind her, the king and Noah had also arrived. As soon as Noah landed, he happily waved and called out sweetly, "Sister Atoria!" The boy then found it strange because he was now in a room. Why was there suddenly a room? Was someone living here? Noah's eyes quickly spotted a pile of leaves on the floor. The boy immediately picked them up and sniffed the fragrant scent. The gluttonous Noelle opened his mouth, wanting to take a bite. Seeing this, Atoria was horrified. She couldn't believe that idiot would dare to eat something from an alien. Wasn't he afraid it was poisonous? Luckily, the king quickly covered his son's mouth, telling him to avoid touching things here and not to eat anything. Atoria breathed a sigh of relief, feeling that this idiot was lucky to have a smart father. But she quickly felt a murderous aura. Atoria cautiously looked up and found the heavy killing intent came from the king's eyes looking at her. He had clearly seen all of Atoria's over-the-top expressions. After glaring at Atoria, the king returned to his analysis. He felt that these things resembled the strange creatures he had seen on the battlefield before. Could this be their planet? 1,000 years ago. Because the blue planet was no longer habitable, humans migrated from the blue planet to the red star. Now, the red star was showing strange phenomena and would probably only last a few more thousand years. It seemed humans would have to move again. If this planet was suitable for living, he thought about this and then turned around, telling his 2 children to stay in this safe place while he went out to check. Hearing his father say that, Noelle asked, "Is father going out?" The king nodded, telling him to stay here and take care of his sister. He gave Noah a capsule, telling him to get food from it if they were hungry. Noelle took the capsule and thanked his father. Boy was surprised to see so many things inside. Food, drinks, clothes of all sizes. Noelle wondered why his father had brought so many things. This was enough for 3 people to live here for 3 years. Atoria, looking at the pile of things, was also surprised. That jerk king looked so cold. But he was actually quite thoughtful. But it turned out these things were prepared by the queen. The king patted his son's head, telling him he had everything he wanted to eat and wear. The king had unknowingly kept these things for 5 years. If he remembered correctly, the queen was only 18 at the time. 5 years ago, an 18-year-old Livia, beautifully dressed, told her Kaelin that she was ready. She threw herself into his arms, saying they could leave. Looking at the pile of things Livia had packed, the king was speechless and asked her why she had brought so much when they were only going out for a day. Livia stood on her toes and kissed the king's cheek, saying she knew they were only going on a 1-day honeymoon. But her little head kept worrying about what if something happened? What if they ended up on a deserted island? What if all the ministers couldn't find them and they had to survive on the island for a few years? The king listened and smiled softly, then gently flicked the queen's forehead. There aren't that many what-ifs. Livia cried out in pain and held her forehead. She still held her ground and asked her husband, "But if something did happen, wouldn't these things be very useful?" King Kalin patted his son's head, telling the boy to stay and take care of his sister until he returned. This scene stunned Otoria. She never thought someone so cold could have such a warm smile. She wondered what Kalin had just remembered to become so gentle. After the king left the next morning, Otoria was still sound asleep in this strange bed. The moment she opened her eyes, she saw Noel staring at her. The boy said that although she was young and not very smart, with their father gone, he could only talk to her. Otoria was so startled by the boy that she screamed. She couldn't believe this fool was staring at her while she was sleeping. Noel, seeing that Otoria was awake, asked if she had noticed any changes in them. Otoria just thrashed about in fear as her brother grabbed her head. The little girl slapped Noel so hard his face turned. It seemed the movement was a bit too strong, and the back of her shirt suddenly ripped. Otoria was confused. Just then, Noel burst out, laughing rudely. The boy said Otoria was just like him. Otoria struggled in her tight clothes to turn and glare at her brother. Noel rolled on the floor laughing, telling his sister not to look because her shirt was already torn. Otoria's anger boiled. Is a girl's torn shirt really that funny? Otoria turned into a fierce tiger and pounced on Noel. The helpless brother was bitten and scratched all over. After getting a good beating, Noel finally learned to speak properly. The boy meekly explained that he didn't know why, but when he woke up this morning, his clothes had suddenly become smaller. After changing into new clothes from the capsule, Noel was surprised that the clothes his father had left for them hadn't changed. She thought it wasn't that the clothes had gotten smaller, but that they had grown. The next day, the little girl, who was only a few months old, could now stand firmly on both feet, and her hair had grown much longer. Otoria looked at herself and thought that growing up like this was a bit too fast. Next to her, a button on Noel's shirt popped off and hit her on the head. Noel could only laugh awkwardly and apologize to his sister. The boy also noticed that he seemed to have grown taller again. On the third day, Noel came to Otoria crying for help, making her sigh. In the boy's hand was a small tooth mixed with blood. Noel cried that he was coughing up blood and was about to die. Otoria looked at him with disdain and told him it was just him losing a tooth. What was he crying about? In her heart, she cursed that jerk king, who had been gone for 3 days, and she didn't know when he would be back. The 3-year-old boy was still being a nuisance, grabbing Otoria's hair and crying that he didn't believe her. Certain that coughing up so much blood meant he would die. Otoria sat on the bed, lost in thought. This place was too strange. They had been here for 3 days, and their bodies had changed as if it had been 3 years. On the 4th day, the second prince's hair was longer than his body. The boy told Otoria he had a question. Otoria coldly told her brother to just say it. Noel's question was, no one had taught Otoria to talk, so how did she suddenly know how to speak? Otoria was startled. That's right. Although her body had grown, she still only had the intelligence of a normal child. How could she suddenly know how to speak in just a few days? Otoria had to come up with a reasonable excuse. The little girl finally put on a cute act and praised her second brother for being so smart. Otoria looked at second brother, heard second brother speak, and Otoria doesn't know why she knows how to talk either. This adorable answer directly captured the second prince's heart. It was now the 5th day. Otoria stood before the space-time portal and told her second brother that they weren't waiting anymore. They had to go out. Noel was shocked. The boy still remembered his father's words, to wait. Otoria was adamant that they couldn't wait any longer and told Noel to look at them. In just 5 days, it was as if 5 years had passed. This place was so strange. Otoria asked Noel if he had ever thought that their father being out alone for so many days without returning might have encountered some trouble. Hearing the word trouble, Noel panicked. The boy trembled and asked Otoria, "Father is so powerful. How could he possibly run into trouble?" Otoria then took her second brother's hand and said firmly that they couldn't hesitate any longer. They had to go out and save their father. In her heart, she thought that even if she couldn't find that jerk king, she couldn't stay here any longer. Otherwise, at this rate, in another 2 or 3 months, they would die of old age without any trouble. Before they could act, a loud boom came from outside, and a swirling wind rushed in as if trying to suck everything out. No one thought there was a tornado outside. But it was probably not that simple. All he knew was that in this dangerous situation, the boy was still firmly protecting his sister. A hand reached out from the space-time portal, along with an urgent call. Noel, Atoria. Kalen hugged his two children and pulled them into the space-time portal. Noel was very confused and asked his father what was happening. Kalen's eyes blazed with fire. He told his son not to say anything. This place was extremely dangerous. After they got out, they stopped right in front of that tree. The storm hadn't stopped. A meteorite object shot out from the strange tree towards them. Kalen created a barrier to protect them, but unexpectedly, the barrier was easily shattered by a single impact. The meteor shot towards the two small children. Noel hugged Atoria, could only call out for his father in fear. In the moment of danger, Kalen didn't hesitate to use his own body as a shield for his two children. Nell was so heartbroken for his father that he trembled and cried. Atoria didn't understand. Didn't this king always want her dead? Why was he protecting her like this? Did he want to die? After taking that hit, Kalen was injured to the point of coughing up blood and stumbling. Seeing the red blood fall, Noel became even more panicked and confused. The king wiped the blood away, trying to act like he was fine for his children's sake. He said he was okay and that they would stay here for a while. They could leave when it got dark. Looking at the wound on the king's back, Atoria cautiously asked her father about it, and even offered to apply medicine for him if he had any. The king, with the same attitude, replied that he was fine. It was only then that he noticed how much the two children had grown in just 5 days. This only raised more questions in Kalen's mind. What was with this planet? Only the 3-year-old Noel remained naive. The boy told his father and sister to rest, while he volunteered to protect them. Before he could take a few steps, Noel cried out in pain. It seemed the two children's long hair had gotten tangled in the strong wind. Nell whimpered in pain, repeatedly telling Atoria not to move. Atoria was in just as much pain, feeling like her scalp was about to be ripped off. As evening approached, the space became noticeably calmer. The only solution for the two children's long, tangled hair was a few sharp cuts from a pair of scissors. No's face, after being trimmed, showed clear excitement, while Atoria's heart was dead. Touching her dog-chewed haircut, Atoria felt there was nothing left to live for in this world. No's eyes lit up, asking his father if he looked cool, and if their mother would like his new hairstyle. The king replied to his beloved son with a firm gaze and a determined M. Then, he became thoughtful again. He was thinking about his foolish little woman, knowing that she had probably cried so much these past few days that her face was distorted. Story was still crying over her hair. The little girl asked her father when they could leave. The king replied that they would have 30 seconds to leave, when darkness completely covered this place. The king was still regretful that in 5 days he had only managed to gather a small amount of energy. As it got darker, and when the darkness had completely enveloped the space, with a color as black as ink, the children became more and more anxious to leave. Atoria also noticed something coming out of the great tree. Small shadows, with cute faces, like little spirits, flew all around the big tree. Their mystical light made Nonol and Atoria exclaim in admiration. The little girl pointed to a small spirit and naively told her father to look. They even had eyes. How cute. But Kalen's eyes were filled with tension when he saw them. He worriedly told his children to be careful. Just as he finished speaking, the spirit nuzzled against Atoria's chubby cheek as if to be friendly. Holding 2 small orbs, Atoria asked her father what he had said to be careful about. Kalen froze and replied, "Nothing." He thoughtfully wondered why they were so friendly with Atoria. He remembered 3 days ago when he saw those orbs coming out of the great tree. He was thinking of a way to get the energy orbs out of the tree, and unexpectedly, they came out on their own. Kalen thought it was a good opportunity and reached out to grab an orb. These small bubbles contained a huge amount of energy. If he could collect them and bring them back for research, humans might have a major breakthrough. But when Kalen touched the bubble, it immediately exploded and his hands started bleeding profusely. He never expected this cute, harmless-looking thing to be so powerful. If Atoria or Noel had touched it, their arms would have been done for. Back to the present, Kalen strengthened the barrier and told his young son to stay inside and not move. He stepped outside and saw Atoria absorbing those energy bubbles. Atoria kept absorbing them. The little girl excitedly called for her father to come over. Atoria found these bubbles very magical, After they entered her body, she felt great, full of energy. The little girl casually punched a nearby rock, and unexpectedly the large rock immediately shattered into 100 pieces. Seeing this, Noel's face turned pale. While Atoria was surprised by her own power, she thought it must be her main character, Halo, that had given her superpowers. Noel, on the other hand, was terrified. The boy told himself not to provoke his sister in the future, or her punch would send him on a one-way trip to visit the worms. Kalen smiled. He found this very interesting, because those energy balls were clearly meant to replenish the energy of the creatures on this planet. Humans would explode upon contact. Even he was injured, yet the little girl could absorb them. The king became even more determined to investigate this little girl more thoroughly. Just then, a strange, cold wind blew past. Kalen knew it was time. He quickly grabbed Noel and Atoria. The moment the three of them left, a massive explosion occurred in the area of the great tree. The two children screamed in fear. The danger wasn't over. Thorny tendrils shot up from the ground. They wrapped around Atoria's hand, pulling the little girl towards them. Atoria panicked and could only call for her father. But Kalen only responded to her plea with a cold look before turning his back on her. Even Noel could only watch his sister helplessly. Atoria's eyes were filled with despair and hurt. Her hand still reached out helplessly. We've lived together for so long, and he's just going to leave me like this. She remembered back in the 21st century, when 5-year-old Chloe also had to witness her parents' conflict, their divorce, and them pushing the responsibility of raising a child onto each other without considering their little daughter's feelings. Thinking about that, Chloe, in the form of Atoria, felt even more sorrowful. Even her own biological parents didn't want her. How could this jerk king possibly want her? But as her tears of sorrow fell, a voice responded. Ugly thing. What are you crying for? Atoria was very surprised to see Kalen had returned. She smiled and called out, Father! Then asked if he wasn't abandoning her. Kalen drew his sword and just gave a cold. With sharp slashes, he cut down the thorny vines. Finally, he took Atoria's hand. The king's attitude changed in a second. He suddenly grabbed the little girl's shirt. He told Atoria that the space-time portal was about to close. Her brother was waiting outside and they had to go quickly. And so Atoria was roughly thrown into the space-time portal by her father. After safely returning his daughter to the space-time portal, Kalen himself was entangled by those vines. He never expected these vines to grow so quickly. Atoria, with tears in her eyes, could only turn back and call for her father with a weak voice. The king, while struggling, sternly told his daughter to go and leave him. The moment the king's entire body was swallowed by the ferocious vines, Atoria still wondered, did he sacrifice himself for me? Looking back at the space-time portal, Noel was holding out his hands, telling her to come quickly. Meanwhile, back in the royal palace of Estonia, the palace was a mess of documents, accompanied by a lamenting voice asking why little Kalen still hadn't returned. Being a temporary king was really tough. A man with a half-demonic appearance sat slumped in a chair. He was bored of reading piles of trashy documents and had no time to admire pretty girls anymore. This man was temporarily helping Kalen manage the country's affairs. While he was complaining, he suddenly saw a capsule moving towards him. He happily realized it was a space-time portal. 5 years had finally decided to come back. He tossed the capsule into a spacious area. Atoria immediately tumbled out, thankfully caught by the man. This demonic man began to exude his charm, asking, "Such a beautiful little girl. You must be Princess Atoria, right?" Atoria looked at him, her face turning green. She wondered who this guy was. Just then, from the space-time portal, a shout was heard, followed by a pair of legs. The demonic man was stunned, not expecting another person. The moment Noel landed with a thud, the demonic man sprang aside to avoid him. Noel sat up, a large bump on his head, groaning in pain. But seeing the demonic man, the boy's eyes lit up, and he called him Uncle Alan. Alan just clicked his tongue and grimaced, showing his disdain. Who is this ugly brat? Noel thrashed under his uncle's prejudiced shoe, saying he was Noel. Hearing that it was Noel, Alan's face changed and he warmly welcomed him. Noel then anxiously told his uncle that his father was still trapped inside and to go save him. Just as he finished speaking, the space-time capsule exploded.